Good evening. Thanks for coming out on a rainy North Carolina night, but I can't think of a better reason to come out than reliving history, because history matters. I want to welcome you all to the John Locke Foundation's 50th anniversary look back at Watergate. Watergate, we all know what the event is, but it is amazing the lasting legacy of it. It rocked a nation. It caused a constitutional crisis. It brought down a sitting president, and it still resonates in our culture today. It's also, most people, probably young people, don't even remember that it was actually originally a hotel in the Washington, D.C. area. Instead, now, it's synonymous with political corruption and abuse of power. So tonight you're going to hear from two North Carolinians who were young attorneys at the time. They were on the front lines. They were changing the trajectory of our nation. And we're thrilled to have all of you here tonight to join us and listen as these two gentlemen recall what it was like behind the scenes. Now, I'm Amy Cook. I'm the CEO of the John Locke Foundation. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, the John Locke Foundation is named for the 17th century English political philosopher and intellectual giant, John Locke, whose thoughts and ideas had a profound impact on our founding fathers and made their way into our founding documents. We here in North Carolina, we're also a 501c3. We're a nonprofit organization. That means we accept charitable contributions. We at the Locke Foundation envision a North Carolina in which liberty and limited constitutional government are the cornerstones of our society, so that individuals and institutions can determine their own destinies. And we do this through a variety of different capacities: research, grassroots outreach. We have a leadership program, and two that are going to be on display here tonight. One, Carolina Journal, our media outlet. The other one is our North Carolina History Project, led by Dr. Troy Kickler. He's our in-house historian. Not many think tanks can brag about that, but we can. Now, for more information on the John Locke Foundation, or to make a contribution, visit johnlocke.org. And for all the political and policy news that you can trust, visit carolinajournal.com. Now, in just a moment, Troy's going to come up on stage, but right now, I want to point your attention to the big screen. We're going to start off with a little video about what Watergate was. Thank you all for being here tonight.
In the early morning hours of June 17, 1972, a break-in at the Democratic National Committee offices at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C., led to the arrest of 5 men. It quickly escalated to a political and legal crisis that reached the highest levels of the United States government, stirring a historic constitutional crisis that claimed a presidency. The break-in occurred during the middle of the 1972 presidential campaign and President Richard Nixon's bid for reelection. This January 8, 2023 is the 50th anniversary of the Watergate criminal trial, presided over by Judge John Searcia. The watershed trial revealed a web of illegal activity involving Nixon's advisors. Among them, that the committee to re-elect the president used a covert slush fund to support activities against political opponents. Then U.S. Attorney General John Mitchell chaired the committee. During the trial, E. Howard Hunt, who planned the break-in, and 4 of the burglars pled guilty. G. Gordon Liddy and James McCord, the other burglar, refused to cooperate. They were convicted on various charges and sentenced to prison. After the trial, the U.S. Senate formed the Select Committee on Presidential Campaign Activities, launching a year-long investigation led by U.S. Senator Sam Ervin of North Carolina and his legal team. McCord and former White House counsel John Dean began cooperating with committee investigators, alleging that the White House, including President Nixon, ordered a cover-up of the break-in. A White House appointments secretary told investigators that the Oval Office had a taping system, but the battle to get those tapes would challenge the U.S. Supreme Court and White House claims of executive privilege. Although never directly implicated in the crimes, ultimately Nixon was found to be complicit in covering them up and using federal agencies to obstruct justice. Faced with possible impeachment, Nixon became the only president ever to resign from office on August 9, 1974. In an East Room ceremony in the White House, Gerald Ford was sworn in as the nation's 38th president shortly thereafter. In September of that year, Ford made a surprising announcement pardoning Nixon. Ford later lost re-election in 1976 to Democrat Jimmy Carter. The media's relentless focus on Watergate contributes to its legacy. Time magazine alone has devoted more than 40 Watergate-related cover stories. The Washington Post's coverage by then Cub reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein established the two in American history, in pop culture, and in regular references in modern political discourse. The movie All the President's Men galvanized the scandal in mass media for future generations. However, the scandal's impact has been much broader over the last 50 years. The word Watergate has become synonymous with government corruption and abuse of executive power. The term gate has been tacked on to more than 200 political scandals ever since, from Travelgate and Monica-gate under the Clinton administration to Russiagate under the Trump administration. While younger generations don't always know where the gate suffix originated, the lessons have lasted decades. Elected leaders often think of it when choosing their closest advisors. Separate branches of government are more aware of overreach, and public servants are emboldened to seize opportunities to put the country ahead of political power and change history.
Thank you for being here this evening. I was a little bit nervous when it was raining. I'm like, how is this going to affect the turnout? Because inclement weather like that has a tendency to do so. But I see we have a good number in attendance, and I want to thank you so much for being here. And I want to especially thank former Congressman Bob Etheridge for being in attendance as well. I'm going to say a few words, recap some of what the video had to say, and then Rufus and Jean and I are going to have just a conversation, like three guys in a den talking, just talking about things, and it'll be ordered but in a casual atmosphere. And then you'll have an opportunity for Q&A. And you'll see some other stuff. You can write it down on a 3x5 card, give it to staff, or you can text a certain phone number, and the questions will be read and will be answered. Again, my name is Troy Kickler. I'm a senior fellow at the Locke Foundation, and I'm managing director of the North Carolina History Project, our social studies curriculum project. And those are, generally speaking, that's what I do at the Locke Foundation. I won't take up too much time, but I was thinking about this driving over here today. I've been on some conservation boards and stuff like that. And then whenever that happens, they always look for, in North Carolina, they always look for geographical diversity. Who's going to be, each of the three major regions, it would be nice if they have representation there. And I was thinking about this today, unplanned, but I think this type of stuff is pretty cool. You have a native Sampson County boy over there, you have a native Watauga County boy over there, and you have a native Randolph County boy right here. So that's the West Piedmont and the eastern part of the state is represented here tonight. Like I said, I'm glad you're here. I was a little worried because of the rain, but we're going to get the event started. It was 1972, a reelection year. Nixon had defeated Hubert Humphreys in 1968. This time, in 72, he ran against George McGovern. He won the election, yet a scandal soon emerged. Nixon and his staff were paranoid during the re-election. Worried about information leaks, a plumber group was formed. Why called plumbers? Because plumbers fix leaks. So in May and June of that year, the plumbers broke into the Watergate building. What were they looking for? To this day, nobody really knows what they were looking for. A man named G. Gordon Liddy led the group. The question is, who ordered the break-in? Who ordered the break-in? The person suspected was Nixon's White House counsel, John Dean. But who ordered it? That's the question. Well, they broke into the building in May and June of 72. A security person suspected a break-in and called the police. And maybe we can get into this in our discussion, why he suspected there was a break-in. As mentioned in the film, Liddy later got 5 years in prison and was fined. He was recalcitrant, basically. And so he went to jail for 5 years for that. The Watergate investigation started on January 8th, 1973. And that's one of the reasons why we're having this commemoration now, because around this time is when the investigation started. Nixon obstructed justice. He ordered the CIA to tell the FBI to abandon the case. In essence, he violated the laws he took an oath to uphold. He made an appeal to the American public. Maybe you recall or seen clips of the "I'm not a crook" speech with the jowls going back and forth. It was to no avail. The public had abandoned him. Public opinion had abandoned him. In the end, on August 9th, 1974, he resigned. He avoided impeachment, but he left the office in disgrace. Now here we go to tonight. North Carolina, as mentioned in the video, played a key role in that investigation. U.S. Senator Sam Ervin led the investigation. And tonight, which I think is pretty cool, we have an opportunity to talk to two attorneys who investigated Nixon's staff and the Watergate scandal. This is a really good opportunity for us tonight. So our two speakers on the far left, my far left, your right, is Gene Boyce and then Rufus Edmisten. Let me tell you a little bit about these attorneys and then we'll start the conversation. Eugene Boyce is an accomplished attorney who served as senior counsel at Nixon Pruitt. I looked at a list of all his court cases, what he's won and lost. If you look on, I like boxing, and so you go on I've told people this, you go online and you can see a boxer's record and it's coded in like green or red or whatever the color code is. Well, I looked at Gene Boyce's litigation history. He's only had two losses out of all those years legislating. He looked at me and said, and those two judges were wrong. So, Gene's mind, he's never lost a case. But, so he was senior counsel at Nixon Pruitt. He's focused primarily in the areas of class action law, litigation, commercial litigation, and constitutional law, and he knows the state constitution back and forth. One of Boyce's signature achievements was serving as assistant chief counsel to the Watergate committee alongside Senator Sam Ervin. He was the lead investigator in the discovery of President Nixon's White House taping system. You've heard that there were 18 minutes of missing tape. This man discovered that. So he's a Campbell Law practitioner and residence. Boyce is the namesake of Campbell Law's G. Eugene Boyce Center of Advocacy at Campbell Law. Our other speaker is Rufus Edmisten. He graduated from George Washington University. Well, he earned his law degree from George Washington University. with honors. He started 10 years of service on the North Carolina Senator Sam Ervin's staff, and that culminated in him becoming Chief Deputy Counsel to the Watergate Committee. He's been elected State Attorney General in 1974. He ran for governor against Jim Martin in 1984.
Bad year.
And he did not come out the victor in that, but I was reading in his autobiography, and I'm going to share this story. Rufus sings country music, or has, and his mother told him if he'd have sang a little more Amazing Grace and a little less Honky Tonk Angel, he might have won. So he's Attorney General of North Carolina. He ran for the governor of North Carolina, and he's been North Carolina's Secretary of State. So I'm not going to take up any more time. Just wanted you to get to know a little bit about these fellows before we start talking. And now we'll start the conversation. My first question. Take my glasses off. I need them to read, but if I walk, it's like I'm struggling. All right. So my first question I wanted to know is, how did each of you become involved in Watergate? How did each of you from small town North Carolina end up in Washington, D.C. on one of the biggest national news events in the nation's, at least modern history?
Well, who do you want to go first, right?
Well, you started. Let's
First
go.
of all, let me call out in the audience
Okay.
some other Watergaters. Michael Carpenter and his beautiful wife is there with him. She's on public television equipment. Lacey Presnell III. They were invaluable in the Watergate scandal. And I saw Rich Leonard here somewhere, Dean Rich Leonard. I'm glad to see you come to get some knowledge tonight, son. I think he's still here.
Oh, he's over there.
Yeah. I'll start by saying I grew up in Watauga County, and I was discussing with Representative Howard Penny out there a moment ago, putting up hay. We stacked hay back in those days when I was a young boy on the farm. And Mike Carpenter can tell you about it because he's from a farm in Fines Creek up in western North Carolina. And I was the tromper, and my four brothers would throw the hay and try to hit me with a pitchfork. And I think that has clouded my being all these years of fear of being hit by a pitchfork. And if you're in politics like I was for 28 years, Troy, you're going to get some pitchforks. So I started out at an early age. I used to love it when Senator Ervin would come by Watauga County and he would make a speech. And I said to myself, someday I would love to be around that man because he was this great orator. He was just such a Southern gentleman. And I started pestering him throughout college. Every time I'd see him, I'd say, Senator Ervin, I want to work for you. I guess he got tired of me. And I moved to D.C. to go to law school at nighttime. And night school is cruel and unusual punishment. I can tell all that right now. If you go to work in the day and go to law school at nighttime, it's cruel and unusual punishment. And finally, after I taught the third grade for a year, I often say that I taught two times, my first and my last. I taught the third grade, and I got a call from Senator Ervin's office that said, come over. We have a position for you on the Constitutional Rights Subcommittee. I kept going to law school at nighttime and started driving Senator Ervin. It wasn't like driving Miss Daisy, it was like driving God. And then I later became Chief Counsel and Staff Director of the Separation of Powers Subcommittee. That's where I first got a hold of Mike Carpenter. And at 30 years old, you don't know where you're going. You have no idea. You don't know a thing until you're about 70 years old, right, Gene? And
I'm not 70.
And how I got that job, I don't know. And then came along Watergate. And I know I'm being long about this, Troy, but you've got to understand how it started. Senator Ervin wanted somebody who'd been around for a while that knew about how things work on Capitol Hill. Well, if you've been on Capitol Hill for 10 years working on committees and this and that, you know where the nooks and crannies are, you know how to get to the bathroom. And he said, I need somebody that knows how this place works, because he had appointed Sam Dash as the chief counsel, and Sam Dash was a professor at Georgetown University and didn't know his way out of the storm on Capitol Hill. And so Senator Ervin needed somebody. And I was over one night, and Gene will tell a different story. He used to work for Ike Andrews, and I want Gene to tell you how I accosted him, and you understand now how I got on Watergate. I want Gene to tell you how he got on Watergate.
Yeah, I know, Gene, you talk about circumstances, and
It was everything that happened all along was a matter of circumstance. I've done a lot of study when I found out what circumstance, what the word meant. It has been just a pure circumstantial existence. The only reason I'm here tonight, the only reason I was involved in all of this was one very simple circumstance. I had a Raleigh address. Well, what the hell's that got to do with anything? Ike Andrews was a lawyer friend of mine, and I didn't like the courthouse, and I spent all my time in the courthouse after 3 years in the Army doing it. And we became friends, and Ike decided to run for Congress, and I congratulated him. I said, I think that's wonderful. He said, well, Gene, I want you to be my campaign manager. I said, you're what? He said, campaign. I said, I don't know anything about, and I didn't at that time, about being head of a political campaign. I said, why do you want me? He said, because you have a Raleigh address. One circumstance, I had a Raleigh address. He said, I want you on my political bulletin, and I want you on it. There are 4 counties in our district. There are more voters in Wake County, and I want a man with a Raleigh address on my campaign information. That was the only reason that he did that.
He fibs. He fibs.
Well, yeah, I do every now and then. But I did go on and went on board, and having done that, he won the election by 800 votes. The Republican candidate at that time brought a suit in federal court, and I got back into something I knew about, and that's being in court, and went before a Republican judge who ultimately ruled in my and Ike's favor on December the 27th. And Ike said, Gene, thank you so much, but you got to go with me. I said, I ain't going to Washington. No way. Said my first boss, who later, Beverly Lake Sr., said the most beautiful sight in the world is on an airplane at 10,000 feet over D.C., headed south. I saw what he meant about that, but I did follow through on it and followed up on it, and it turned in just because I had a Raleigh address. Went to Washington to help Ike set up his staff. My court ruling was on December the 27th. I won the battle in court on the election, and Ike was sworn in a week from then. He said, Gene, you got to go with me. I don't have a staff. Just go set up my staff for me. And I gave in, went to Washington. I have a lot of little wine parties at night in Washington. I don't drink. Never did, but I saw somebody there and met somebody for the first time who, have you ever missed one?
Me?
And he said, that was in, was 50 years ago this month, wasn't it? Yeah. Yep. Anyway, he said, we're starting a committee on this investigation. He said, I got 3 attorneys, but none of them know how to ask questions. Won't you please come over and help us? I said, well, I'll help you get set up. And that circumstance led to a whole lot of things we'll talk about. One of which was the witness list. I was added as the 4th attorney. There were 60 witnesses on the list. the Watergate committee list, and there were 3 attorneys that were on there. They didn't have any real question and answer experience, and I hadn't done anything but that all my life by then, or since then, come to think of it. And so I went on board, and they divided up the witness list of 60 among 3 and added me as the 4th, split the witnesses up. Instead of 20, 20, and 20, they split it up 15, 15, 15, and I had 15. And the man that knew about the tape was, by that coincidence, by that circumstance, on my list. And I interviewed him, and we discovered the taping system.
Yeah, if I can follow up with that. His last name was Appleby, correct?
Huh?
His last name was Appleby.
Appleby, yeah.
If you could share with the audience exactly, well, just tell them about the interview you had with him, if you don't mind, when he spilled the beans, so to speak, that
Yeah.
that were missing tape.
Well, he knew, he was inside, and he knew what was going on. And he was a straightforward fellow, and he said, and he was on the, when I did witness interview, they were under oath, and he said, I'm under oath, and I know I've got to tell the truth. And so he faced it very forwardly.
Yeah. Didn't you say his attorney reminded him that he needed to tell the truth before?
Yeah, he said, I have been advised, and I know I've got to tell the truth. And I said, you're right about that. And he did. He was very forthcoming.
Well, Gene is being his usual modest self. I had to turn Senator Ervin loose on him, by the way, to get him to really come over to the Watergate Committee, and he acceded to the senator's wishes. And you're talking about discovery of the tapes. Gene was perceptive enough to know that during John Dean's testimony, which labored on for almost 3 days, the most boring testimony I've ever heard of anybody in my life. And Gene heard him say at one point, I think I was being taped.
Felt like I was being taped.
None of us caught that. So Gene Boyce, in questioning that witness, by the way, was one that none of us wanted to be around. Here's what happened on the Watergate Committee. Like any good lawyer, we never put anybody on the stand until you had them in an executive session and knew what they were going to say. And I looked on that list, and there's somebody named Butterfield, Alexander Butterfield.
Yep.
I said, that sounds boring to me. I think I'll go to a party. Well, we indeed did go to a party. We went to a party at Senator Herman Talmadge's house and was having a big time. And here came this rumbling, almost cascading noise of a usually quiet man. And Gene first informed, mind you, now this is breaking news that is going to be the catalyst for bringing down the presidency. Because John Dean had just droned on for 3.5 hours. The White House had said he's a liar, he's a traitor, he's the whole reason for this Watergate mess. Can't believe a word he says. And so if this were true about a taping system, then we'd find out whether John Dean was lying or not. And so Gene kept it to himself. I think, Gene, I'm going to tell this on Lacey right now. I think you rode all the way to Raleigh with him, Lacey Presnell right there. Your buddy, your almost son, and you didn't tell him, you skunk you.
I still felt bad about it. But
well, thank God you told me.
Senator Ervin said, don't talk. And
I told Senator Ervin, he said, this is something I've never written about. He said, don't tell that damn Lowell Weicker. I'll never forget it. Now, Lowell Weicker was the senator from Connecticut, was he? Yeah. And because he had been leaking a lot of things, and so obviously I didn't tell him. But then the whole furor in Washington, D.C. was, as a taping system, we're going to find out whether or not Nixon or John Dean was telling the truth. Because remember, John Dean said, this thing goes way up. I told the presidency that there was a cancer on the presidency. And so what Gene brought into shape was the beginning of the downfall of Richard Nixon. Now, all these other things occurred, but had it not been for the discovery of those tapes, and because of a person listening like a good lawyer would do, and some of us were up there rolling around on our chairs, And don't you talk about that, Carpenter. They accused me of being in a roller chair and following the camera. Well, if you're anywhere in the building, you got the camera, but I knew which ones to follow. And I'm going to say this, Troy. I know you're going to ask a question a little bit later on, but to my knowledge, this is the only committee that has existed since, and not since that time, has any other committee been bipartisan. Not a one that I can think of. When you had, now we've got some fine legislators here tonight, two from Harnett County, Jim Burgess and Howard Penny. They are bipartisan people. They're able to get along with people. Bob Etheridge was great at that. But nothing since that time, Troy. You're a historian. I don't believe it's worked, but this thing worked. And when Howard Baker heard about the taping system, he was one of the first ones, Gene, as you recall, who said, we got to get them. We've got to get the taping system.
And he was a Republican from Tennessee.
The Republican from Tennessee. And in the beginning, Howard Baker and Senator Sam Ervin made a pact. Both of them made an agreement that we will do this thing together. We will not disagree in public. And I defy you to find any time at all the Watergate, and there are thousands of pages of hearings. And Gene was the records hearing attorney too, he didn't tell you. He put together the hearing records. It is amazing that you cannot find any time when Senator Ervin and Howard Baker disagreed on something, because they worked it out beforehand, which is what a lot of us should do politically. And I've tried to do that in all my public offices. And I'm probably jumping ahead of things, Troy, but I just wanted to get that straight.
Fine. Yeah, Gene, you were innovative in using computers, correct, to collect research, which you later analyzed.
It was quite a thing of chance. I had some friends that were in the Library of Congress, and visited with them over in the library one day. They said something about the textbooks they had. I don't know how many million books they had. Said, yeah, we keep all these books on the shelf, but we have index cards on each book. It tells the author and the date of publication, what it's about, and all the details on it. Said, but we don't use that anymore. We use it's all on a computer. 1973. I said, on a what? They said, on a computer. I said, what is that? I said, come on, we'll show you. I still remember walking with them over to the Library of Congress, walked into the room, there was a computer. This wall, and this wall. It wasn't anywhere close to this. It was 3 walls of machinery, and all of the books, instead of them still using 3x5 index cards, were put on a computer. And with the investigators we had, some were pretty good, but some didn't do real well about keeping up with things. They would do their investigations on a 3x5 index card, like all the books were, but they converted the book information to a computer, and so I got in with Rufus, and we converted the Watergate Committee into the first Senate computer organization.
The first computer ever used in a Senate hearing. And here you've got another innovator here that came from North Carolina. I don't think North Carolina gets enough credit, because you mentioned Woodward and Bernstein. We saw them at Watergate, the 50th anniversary in Water, and they're great people. But so much of what everybody did is built upon what the Watergate Committee did. Michael Carpenter and Lacey Presnell, they were out doing things that nobody their age should do either. I looked one day, and Michael Carpenter had gone somewhere down into the islands. I said, what are you doing down there? He said, I'm chasing somebody named, what was his name, Michael? That big financier?
Well, probably thinking about Bibi Rebozo.
Well, Bibi Rebozo. That was Nixon's big buddy. And so we had here's the genesis of a lot of the North Carolina folks. Sam Dash who was really good for the chief counsel, brought down these Ivy League lawyers. And I was be darned if I was going to let them run the committee. I wanted me some good homespun people. And that's why I was so anxious to get Gene, because I knew about him before I even went to Washington. And it was a good counterbalance, because you give a committee, this committee probably had more power than any committee that's ever been formed on Capitol Hill, complete subpoena power. It had no problems about money. We put together a staff of over 100 people within a few weeks. And I had a great deal to do with that. And I think it's amazing that we did as well as we did, because there was so many forms for error, so many times for human error. I don't think, I never got a call or a note from anybody about unethical treatment on the part of anybody on the Watergate committee during their investigations that treated them in an ill manner. We were pretty smart. The subpoenas went out, and we didn't say, let's go out and subpoena John Mitchell right quick. Let's subpoena their secretaries. Subpoena the secretary. She knows where all the books and papers are. She or he. Don't get me crossed up here now. In any kind of war of the sexes. But a secretary would get a subpoena, and they would readily turn over most of the stuff before their bosses could hide it. And Gene, you may correct me and any of our other Watergate guys, I don't believe that, with the exception of Richard Nixon, did we ever have anybody refuse to honor a subpoena?
No.
Now you think
No,
about that today. These things fly around like a bunch of crows today. It just, subpoenas flying everywhere. Somebody says, well, I'll go blow my nose on this one, and I'll do something else. That didn't happen then. There was a respect for the rule of law. And one time, I believe it was Ehrlichman said, I'm not going to come give my testimony. And Senator Ervin said, well, if you don't do it, I'll call the marshal of the Senate, and I'll have him come arrest you and put you in the basement of the Senate. Up trotted Ehrlichman. He didn't flinch at all, because Ervin meant that, and he would have probably done it. So that's, again, how respect for institutions were the mode of the day then, and they're not now. And I'm not going to get in about any contemporary stuff, because Troy wants history.
That's right. That's right. I have a couple more questions I'd like to ask you before we open it up to Q&A. And if you don't mind telling a story about your interaction with G. Gordon Liddy when you interviewed him.
Were you there that day, Carpenter? Well, as I told you, before any witness went on the stand, I call it the stand, but the hearing room, you interrogate them, find out what they're going to say, and I said, well, I'll take Gordon Liddy. And so we called him into my office, which was a little 3-story house. Sam Dash kicked me, thought he kicked me out of my fine Senate office, but I got a whole house with 3 bathrooms in it, 3 stories, a kitchen, everything in the world. It was sort of like the Bear Patch. And so we subpoenaed Mr. Liddy to come over to my office. Well, he came in there, and this is the God's truth. I sat down behind my desk, and he was sitting in front. And all of a sudden, this man jumped up on the desk. He went like that. I looked around at somebody. I said, what is this? I said, Mr. Liddy, do you have anything to say? He said, no. I said, your presence is dismissed. And I went and told Senator Ervin, I said, I don't think we want to call this man as a witness. I said, he's liable to jump up on the panel where you are and wring your neck. So that's why you didn't hear from G. Gordon Liddy, but he was a very temporal man. He had a lot of issues, I think. Now, Troy, you are going to let me tell about delivering the subpoena at some point here.
Yes,
So
yes.
I told Senator Jim from Harnett County I was going to tell him something nobody knows. After Gene's people discovered the tapes, then the question arose before the committee, how are we going to get the tapes? And I was sitting in the office with Senator Ervin and all the committee. And by the way, Senator Fred Thompson was one of the finest people. He was Senator Baker's and later became a senator in the Hunt for Red October, a fine gentleman. I was sitting in the office, and it was Senator Herman Talmadge said, well, Senator Ervin, how are we going to, or Sam, you know, they call one another first names, and of course I would fall upon a spear before I would even think of calling Senator Ervin Sam. And Senator Ervin said to me, he said, Rufus, go get the president on the phone. So like, well, go get a loaf of bread. And so I went in this little anteroom, and I knew the number to the White House, and I knew who would answer the phone. This particular phone number would be Rosemary Wood, the 17 Gap minute lady. And so in those days, I dialed it up. I dialed it up, and I said, this is Rufus Edmisten, Deputy Chief Counsel of the Senate Watergate Committee. Senator Ervin would like to speak to the president. My God, son, what are you doing? You're from Boone, North Carolina. You used to milk cows. What are you doing this? Yeah. And she said, hold on, I'll be back with you. Well, I was holding on. If any of you are old enough to recall, repeatedly, Richard Nixon kept saying, the Ervin Committee is out to get me, out to get me. And all of a sudden, this voice comes on the phone. Hello, Senator Ervin, this is Richard Nixon. I thought, oh, God. And I blurted out, President Nixon, Senator Ervin wants to get you on the phone. That happened. I later told them, and they rolled on the floor with it, but they came back out, and Senator Ervin got on the phone with Richard Nixon and his Gene, and the boys will tell you, the more the senator would get excited, the more his eyebrows would be like windshield wipers. And I could tell things were not going well. And he ended up saying, well, Mr. President, I'm sorry that you will not voluntarily turn over the tapes. I think you could do the nation a great justice by turning over the tapes and get this thing out of the way. He said, out of the way. And hung up the phone. And then Senator Baker said, the only thing I know to do is subpoena him. No president had ever been subpoenaed up to that time by a committee of the Congress. It's just something you didn't do under separation of powers. Of course, now, you know, one flies through the window, you subpoena somebody. And they voted unanimously. No objection, not any senator on the thing. All 7 of them voted unanimously to subpoena President Nixon. Well, here's where it comes sort of personal. I decided, since I'd helped put this thing together, and since I was sort of the conductor of the railroad, I was going to appoint myself to take that subpoena down there. I wanted to be a footnote in history. And that's what exactly Time magazine said, and put it in footnote. So I got in this police car and got in the back of it with the Capitol Hill police, and we rode down to the executive office building, and we were waiting. There was in waiting for us Fred Bushart, the president's counsel. I call him counsel of the week because he would get disgusted with the counsel and fire him the next week and hire somebody else. And I did this little mischievous thing. If some of you recall old enough, Ervin used to read the Constitution from this little book about that big. Gene carries one. I I had one in my back pocket. Well, I delivered the subpoena to all the rigmarole pursuant to Senate Resolution 3233. I hereby serve you with this subpoena. And I went in my back pocket and whipped that little baby out, and I said, I think I've heard it said you need one of these down here too. So I served them with a Constitution and a subpoena. And I had to tell that little story because when you're a footnote in history, Troy, you've got to relish it.
No, I understand. I understand. One more general question, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A, maybe about 10 minutes or so. Is there any, we've talked about this, Gene and Rufus, is there any advice or anything you would like to share with the audience about your experiences at Watergate? I know, Gene, you one of your phrases I saw in your office is never give up. And I know, Rufus, you said a leader needs to surround himself or herself with good advisors. So in sum, I'm just asking, is there anything you would like to share, Gene and Rufus, with the audience before we open it up to Q&A?
Let Gene's wiser. Let him go first.
Well, I have always been significantly interested in what the real truth is. And I have always promoted the idea that you can get to the truth if you do it in the right way, if you never give up, if you ask the right questions, if you do the right research. The truth is there. The effort it takes to get to the truth, especially in an area like a political area, is hard work. But the truth is there, and you can always find it with one thing: don't ever give up to find out what the real truth is about anything. I found my pocket calendar from 1973, coming back from Washington, the day the interview resulted, the Butterfield interview resulted in the discovery. And Lacey was riding with me, and they said it's a big secret. I was scared to death it was going to be revealed in the News and Observer. And I came home. I couldn't tell Lacey. I did tell Pat, my wife, but I didn't tell anybody else. But I checked the morning paper up at North Hills. There wasn't anything in the Washington paper Sunday morning. I checked again Monday morning on the way back. There was nothing in it. And I went down the hall to the hearing room. The Butterfield had been subpoenaed, and they'd changed the witness schedule. So there was a big question about what on earth is going on. I never will forget walking down that hall to the chamber with a group of 20 reporters, and Connie Chung walked up and said, I said, "Good morning." She said, "Boys, you look like you know something's going on. What's going on?" I said, "I told you everything I know when I said good morning." They had a few names they used, but we went on down and put that information on the calendar that Monday after it was discovered late Friday night before. And I still have my pocket calendar. I found it one time years later and made a copy of it. What I wrote on my pocket calendar when I couldn't talk about it, I couldn't tell Lacey about it, I wanted to. On my pocket calendar I wrote, "Butterfield interview, well, I'll be damned." That was my bit of history, but it was fascinating.
Anything you'd like to share, Rufus, before we go into Q&A?
Yeah, the one thing that I think you and I discussed out there the other day too in the office, they've raided my office. By the way, look at some of the artifacts of it as you go out on the left up there. I called him Troy and his Raiders of the Lost Ark. This may shock some of you in the audience, but I think had Richard Nixon very early on gone to the American people and said, "Look, I screwed up. I'm sorry. Some of my folks messed up. I want to ask you to forgive me." The American people are very forgiving. He refused to do that. And one of the things is never be afraid to say, I'm sorry, I messed up. And secondly, if you ever think you're going to be a leader of any kind in something, surround yourself with good people. Nixon had probably the sorriest, no account people I can ever dream of around him to be a president. What kind of kids would even think of breaking into a place when they didn't know what they were looking for? And what kind of burglars would ever go somewhere with a coat and a tie on? You think about that. And I believe that had Richard Nixon done that, he would have survived the presidency, and he would have probably gone down as in the upper crust of presidents. He did do some fine things. He opened up China. We'd probably be at war with China, I think, had it not been for Nixon's entering into negotiation with China. He did the EPA. Some of you may not like the Environmental Protection Agency, but I think every river we've got would have been on fire by now if it hadn't have had that. And I just think it shows an example of how you can pick a staff that is so sorry that they take you out of office, and you'll find that is what happens on most guys. I was very fortunate in the Attorney General's office to have the finest people. Mike Carpenter was at one time my chief of staff. I could have done a little bit better in the Secretary of State's office. But I've learned that if you want to do things right, let your staff do the work, and let them take some of the credit.
Thank you. We'll open it up for Q&A. I think there were 3x5 cards, or you can text, and then Renee will get the questions, and she'll ask them, and you guys, let's see what we've got.
Okay. Our first question is, in your opinion, was Ford's pardon of Nixon the right thing for the nation, or should Nixon have been criminally prosecuted?
I do not think he should have been criminally prosecuted. My boss, Senator Ervin, did. A number of people did. I believe that the man had exhibited enough, had shamed himself enough. I think it was time for Watergate to be over with. I think Gerald Ford did the right thing, and he, because of his standing up for what he thought was right, he lost the presidency, and that shows you what kind of a man he was.
Gene, do you have any thoughts regarding that?
No, that's fine. I agree. Yep.
Our second question is, can Gene talk more about the discovery of the missing tapes? Who do you believe is responsible, and what came to light?
Ask that again, I'm sorry. The missing tapes.
Yes, can you talk more about the missing tapes? Is there anyone you believe is responsible, and what did that bring to light?
I don't really know, do you?
The missing tapes?
Yeah.
18-minute gap. Okay.
Well, that was, I did interview Rosemary Woods about that, and that part of it was about the only thing that was missing, and it was an unintentional erasure. She was a wonderful woman. She was honest, straight. I trusted her, and I believed she told the truth about it.
I bet that poor woman had to go to several chiropractors after it was over, when that contortion of her reaching over to try to show how that she did it. I thought that poor woman's if she's not got a backache, nothing will ever give her one. I don't think there was anything nefarious about that either. You always have conspiracies around everything. We'll never know. Troy, you mentioned to this day, I don't know what they thought they would get. I can tell you from running 11 times statewide, there's never been a thing in any one of my campaign offices that is worth a tinker's damn, that no one would want. Have a couple pictures of my dog and my wife, and anything else you can get at the elections board. Yeah. So I don't know what they thought they were going to get. And wearing suits.
Well, it was amazing that there was not only a taping system in the Oval Office, the taping system was in 3 more places, one of which was Camp David, where the presidents spent their time off. And what bothered me is when I discovered that, I remembered, that was in the spring, I remembered in the fall that the Premier Brezhnev had come to the United States and had stayed in the Camp David building. And I was told, and I believe that the process was the tape recordings were never used unless Nixon himself was there. I think that was true. That's the way it should have been, and I think it was true.
Well, time, maybe we're running short on time, maybe 2 more questions.
The next question is, if you haven't already mentioned him or her, who was the most memorable Watergate character for you?
Well, the most memorable Watergate character for me was Senator Sam Ervin. I assume you mean, though, who was a witness. That was the most memorable character. But on Senator Ervin, how could you find a guy that could quote the Bible 1 minute, Chaucer the next minute, and then tell about old Uncle Moses down in Burke County, North Carolina? And no offense to that good name, my friend Moses Gallion, I love the name Moses. But the most amazing character was a guy that none of you would remember named Tony Uslowich. He was a former New York City cop. Boy, you have never seen such testimony in your life. He was funny, very, very funny. And the most boring, of course, was John Dean.
The most memorable to me is sitting to my right. I have tried my best to forget him, but I cannot.
All right, 1 more question, please.
The last question is, do you believe the American public and national politicians still prioritize the rule of law over political expedience? And if not, do you think this poses a threat to democracy?
Well, this is a shocker to you probably out here. I think we're in another Watergate. One reason, a terrible case called Citizens United was handed down by the Supreme Court, and I don't know whether Rich Leonard agrees with me on this one or not. I think it's the worst decision they've ever handed down, which said that corporations can act as people. When I went to law school, I don't know about you, Gene, first thing you taught us in corporations was a corporation is not a person. And they made the corporation a person as far as freedom of speech goes, and said that anybody can give any amount of money they want to give because it's a form of free speech. And I think we're right back in another Watergate era because of the huge hordes of money that's used in campaigns now. And that's why you see all this garbage. I got so tired of hearing the last round of elections about tearing people down. I want to tell you folks out here, I don't recall ever in my 11 runs for public office that I ever call into question somebody's family's character or their character. And I want to say this right off the bat. When I ran against Jim Martin for governor, he was the finest gentleman I've ever met. He never said an ugly word about me, and I didn't about him, and that's the way you ought to conduct campaigns.
Well, before I forget, I want to thank everybody for attending, but I want to tell one story before I turn it over to Amy to say some final thoughts, and then we dismiss and have an opportunity to look at the memorabilia, talk with Gene and Rufus some, or just intermingle with each other for a while until we're getting out of here around 7:30-ish. But one story I want to tell, and it may be on the slideshow. I was in Rufus's office a couple times, and I've got to know these gentlemen really well since we started planning this event. We're looking at newspaper clippings, and it's really serious. It's a serious pose. It's Senator Ervin and Rufus, and it says senior Counsel, I forget the exact title, what your exact title was, but Watergate Committee and U.S. Senator Sam Ervin consult Scripture during Watergate hearings. And it's a photo, this is a caption in a major newspaper in the U.S., and it's a caption of them holding up the Bible, looking really pensive inside of it. But you know, looking at the Bible, but inside of it was a lunch menu. And they were deciding whether they were going to order a BLT or a hamburger. But the heading says they're consulting Scripture during the war. Like, you know, they're wanting guidance from above, but they're...
I've been in fear of lightning striking me ever since that. But it's the truth. That's only one occasion, though, Troy.
Only one occasion. All right. Well, thank you again. I'll turn it over for Amy for some final thoughts.
So let's give another round of applause to Jean Boyce and Rufus Edmisten. These guys are legends, and also I didn't realize we had two others in the audience tonight. So at some point, I'd love to grab a photograph of the four of you all, and we could have that. But you all did what was right, and that matters. And history matters, and we should always learn from it. We never want to forget it so that we don't repeat it. So I want to thank you gentlemen for doing this. And I also want to point everybody, there are some great memorabilia out front. Archives, the original subpoena that Rufus, I didn't realize that you actually arranged to serve that on the White House. So I don't know if the Constitution is there or if you left it with them just in case they needed to take notes. But the original subpoena is up there. The gavel that Senator Ervin used. There is a lot of very cool stuff that is on loan to us just for tonight. So take a look at it up there. You may not get a chance to see it another time. Also, we have professional videographers tonight, so we are going to have this available on tape, and we'll if you want to sign up or go to the Locke Foundation and keep checking. I don't know how long it'll take us. I'm sure it'll be a quick turnaround, but we will have this available. So wanted to let you all know that, and then thank you for coming tonight because this was worth it. Thank you, gentlemen. Yep. And drive home safely, please.